And if you only remember one insight from my presentation, it would be this. If we want vocations, we need to build a strong Catholic culture. Can you repeat that with me? Let's do it together. Ready? If we want vocations, we need to build a strong Catholic culture. Thank you, Dr. West, for your introduction. Thank you, Your Grace, for leading us in the prayer and the welcome. Let me begin by a question. Where do babies come from? Those of us who are parents have often been asked this question, but how often have we wondered, where do priests come from? A healthy society can assume that children will be born. Can our church assume that priests will always be born? There appears to be both bad news and good news. The bad news is this: we can't assume that priests will always and everywhere be born. In Canada, we're losing clergy at an alarming rate, roughly the same rate that the church in Germany is also losing clergy. There's also good news. God is still calling. God is calling men in Canada and also in our archdiocese, and some are answering. But I wonder with you, why so few? According to Vatican estimates, to maintain our current number of priests, so here in the Archdiocese, let's say, or anywhere, you start with 100, and we want 100 priests in 20 years. This is what they say. They say that we would need to increase our number of seminarians in Canada by about 3.5 times. So that means currently we have roughly 211 or so in the country. We would have to have more than 750 in the country if we were just to maintain what we have now. Now, God doesn't change. So what happened to us? What would need to change for us to become once again parishes that regularly give birth to vocations? What if we could ask our new priests about their families? What if we could ask about the books they read, about those who influenced them in their decision to say yes? If we did ask questions of these men, wouldn't we gain some valuable insight? Insight, perhaps, that would help us to help others follow in their same path. Well, that's what we did. About 18 months ago, we asked these questions of newly ordained clergy here in Canada. And the little report that some of you would have, I think we passed around 100 and some. So if you have one, this is what I'm talking about. The report is based upon a first-of-its-kind Canadian survey of 23 men from the graduating classes in our seminaries across the country of the years 2021 and 2022. One more word about the survey. We linked some of the questions that we asked to a much larger survey that has been asked by the American bishops of their new priests for the last 25 years. So this meant that we had a sample that we could draw from of a pool of about 9,000. So this helped our work along. In producing this report, we also looked at Canadian census data and provided data that was provided by the Vatican. Now, this is the first of a series of studies that we hope to commission and work on. And over the next 2 years, our goal is to provide a baseline of empirical data that will be useful for our archdiocese and also for other dioceses across the country, youth ministries, camps, and schools everywhere. So for the next 10 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is walk you through a couple of highlights, principally about the people, the parishes, and the prayer practices that these young men engaged in prior to entering seminary. And if you only remember one insight from my presentation, it would be this. If we want vocations, we need to build a strong Catholic culture. Can you repeat that with me? Let's do it together. Ready? If we want vocations, we need to build a strong Catholic culture. To give you a sense of what a young man must listen for if he's going to hear the call of God, it might be helpful for us, first of all, to identify some of the background noise that he would need to block out or perhaps to listen to with some discretion. Here are 3 trends I'd like to touch on about Catholic life in Canada that color how a young person experiences being Catholic today. Now, for those of us who are older than 40, the key here is to recognize how the background music, so to speak, has changed from the time that we grew up compared to the time that young people today are growing up. Between the era, we might say, of the baby boomers and the era of millennials and Gen Z. What happened? Well, we moved from something we might call a more or less comfortable Catholicism to something that has become a radical form of discipleship. Now, I'm not saying that the church has changed or that Catholicism has changed in her doctrines. No, I don't mean that. What I'm talking about, rather, is the experience of being Catholic. How has it felt differently across these different generations? Now, I'm going to explain this, but I'll need your help. And you're going to, there's a principle called active participation, and we're going to engage in that. So bear with me. In a moment, I'm going to get you to all stand up, and we're going to go through this rather quickly. So if I ask you to stand, please go up, and then I'll ask other people to go down, and it will be to illustrate these three trends. Is that okay? Yes? Is that okay? Yes. All right. Okay, here are the three trends. Trend 1, Canada is less Christian. Trend 2, Catholic youth are leaving the church. Trend 3, those who remain are very devout. All right, trend 1. Could everyone stand up? Now, place yourself in the mind of your grandparents or your parents or your old self when you were around 1960. Now, in 1960, what was Canada like? Canada was a place where 98% of people ticked the Christian box. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone was actively Catholic or everyone was doing a good job at being a Christian, but it does mean that we had as a country some sense of common religious solidarity. In 1960, less than 1% of the population claimed to be a nun. A nun meaning they didn't tick the box. They have no religious identity. Now, I'm going to pretend we're in 1960, and I've asked a few young men over here, about 3, which represent roughly 1% of our room, to do something. Now see if you can see them and listen to them. What they're going to do is point at you, these young guys here, they're going to point at you and they're going to say, "Hey you are odd." And you have to do it twice. Okay, you guys ready? You guys right there that I talked to. Thomas, you ready? So you point at everyone and you say, "Hey you are odd." Ready, go.
Hey you are odd.
One more time.
Hey you are odd.
Okay, great. Everyone can be seated. Thanks. Now, how did the rest of you experience that shout? Did you even hear it? Did you hear it? No, probably not. Maybe the few around them heard that you're odd, but the rest of us, no, we were pretty comfortable where we were. It doesn't mean that your life was easy, but it did mean that people weren't challenging the fact that you were a Christian. What happened in the next 40 years? That is to say, around the year 2000, here's what happened. We went from being 98% of the population to 77%. Now that's a dip, but it's not a dramatic dip over 40 years. And around 2000, a lot of people, sociologists, were wondering, well, what's next? Was this an anomaly? Are we going to go back to something approaching where we were in our grandparents' era or not? Nobody knew. There was something on the horizon, though. 16% of the population all of a sudden claimed to be nuns. And that was news, moving from 1% to 16%. Over those 40 years, the change in our society was more on the inside than on the outside. Trends, secularizing trends like feminism, consumerism, individualism, they all broke down and reshaped what it meant to be a Catholic. But that was felt more on the inside. Our institutions and our numbers more or less looked like they did for quite a long time. Okay, last stat, then we're going to trend 2. Where are we today? Well, in 2021, which is when our last census was, the population of Christians went down to 53%, so roughly 1 out of 2. Now, 35% are nuns, so there are more of them than there are more of us. That is to say, of Catholics. Catholics represent 30% of the population. Let's move to trend 2. Trend 2, Catholic youth are leaving the church. You need a professor to tell you that, don't you? Really smart. Okay, I'd like everyone on this row, and I'll tell you I'm going to do this in a second, but anyone who's sitting on the outside, could you please stand? And anyone who's on the outside, only this row, please stand. So do it quickly. Now take a look at them. Everyone take a look. How does this room feel? This is interesting. I don't think anyone has studied this before or published it, but we found it a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's true, so we'll probably publish it. So There are lots of things that you could publish that aren't true, but anyways, this is one that is. So this is roughly 1 out of 6 people in our room. 1 out of 6 people, just to get things going, are what you call ex-Catholics. So if this room represents the Canadian population, those who are standing are representing those who were baptized Catholic, but when it comes to checking a box, they don't check the Catholic box. Most of them became nuns, a few became evangelicals. Let's all stand, please. Pretend we're all Canadian. That is to say, this room, pretend we're all we're representing the totality of the Canadian population. And we'll go quickly. Now, Catholics, how many did we say are Catholic in Canada? 30%. So let's divide the room. Roughly, that'd be like this. So you can all sit down, please, on this side. And the first 2 rows here, you can all sit down. And if you don't mind, the other 3 rows, you stay standing. Okay, so if you're on these 2 rows all the way to the back, yep, keep going, keep going. You're all, so this is the Catholics in our country, 30%. Now, Catholics by what sense? Catholic identity, of course, isn't what it once was, or it means a lot of different things to different people. Now, if you ask, how many of these people here who are standing are sacramentally alive, which just means you go to Mass on Sunday. Okay, it doesn't mean you're good, doesn't mean you don't steal, lie, cheat, the rest of it. Okay, it just means you show up, you're at church. How many of us, are going to Mass on Sundays? This is a pre-COVID stat I'll give you. Okay, so it's going to be lower, but this is the best one we have, and just before COVID. It is, anyone want to guess? 25? 50? Okay. 15%. So what would that mean? So 15% of this body. Okay, how do we figure that out? I think what that would mean is everyone should sit down here except that last row in the back. Okay, so everyone stand except the last. Oh, this was planted. The men in black keep standing. Well done, lads. Thank you. Okay, so this 15% here, this is all that's left in the country that are sacramentally alive. Let's play this same game now and talk about youth. So let's assume we're all, instead of talking about Canadians, we talked about grade 12 students in the country. Okay, the stats would be slightly altered, but roughly they'd be the same. Okay, so let's imagine we're all the grade 12s in the country. Then we divide, we say, okay, how many are Catholic grade 12 students? 30%, you sit down. Then we say how many, no, you guys keep standing. Then we say, how many of you, us Catholic grade 12 students, are going to church? And then we'd say 15%. Yeah, so that's them. Now, who are they? They're the elite. They're the ones that go to youth group. They're the ones that pray. They're the ones that are superstars and leaders in our Catholic schools or our home schools or wherever. So this is a select group. Now, next question. How many of them are going to stay going to church as they enter college? Here we have to stop because actually no one in Canada has bothered to study this. It's true. I think as a side note, I think we're the only place, that is Newman, I think Newman's the only place in the country that is studying anything to do with vocations from an empirical point of view, at least in Canada. Okay, so let's draw on US research. So let's assume that in the US, they're as Christian as we are. Okay? And let's assume that their universities and colleges are as Christian as ours are. Okay, so make that assumption. So research from the US would say this. If you take the, so out of that 15%, take 10 Catholic students, okay, so that is to say, the total set of those who are still going to church and in our grade 12, okay, that's this little group over there, the elite, now send them to university, and now stay in university for 2 years, or a year and a half, somewhere in there. Question, how many have stopped going to church? You're so pessimistic. No, it's not all of them. It's 7 out of 10 of them. Okay, so 7 of you could sit, and let's say just 3 stand. Now, last little exercise here. I want everyone else, please, you don't have to stand, but everyone else turn around at them and point your finger at them, and we're going to say this 2 times. We're going to say, hey, you are odd. Ready? Go. Hey, you are odd. One more time. Hey, you are odd. Okay, thanks. Let's give them an applause. Woo! Now, question. How do you think they feel? They feel odd, don't they? Yes, the experience of being Catholic has changed from the baby boomers to Gen Z, or whatever you call them. Trend 3, those who remain in church are very devout. In fact, this is back to Canadian research, both because of research in our own archdiocese, and I applaud His Grace for doing this was a couple years ago, and research that has been done through Cardis in Canada. Because of that, we can ask and we can answer with some rectitude this question. How devout are those people? Here's how devout they are. They're roughly, by reasonable metrics like, do you read the Bible, do you go to church, do you pray? Things like that. By reasonable metrics, those folks are twice as devout as you are, if you're over 40. Statistically. Okay? Isn't that interesting? For those of us who are over 40, this is one of the takeaways that we should hold, I think. We need to have a lot of sympathy. We need to have a lot of charity. We need to have a lot of appreciation for those young people who are still left standing with their faith. Don't you think so? Let's give them a round of applause. Listen. If you're still in the Catholic game and you're under 30 years old, you are by definition countercultural. You are by definition radical, even if by temperament you're dead set in the middle. Why? Because everything else in our culture has shifted. So there's the third trend. Trend number 1, Canada is less Christian. Canada has youth who are leaving the church. And 3, those who are staying are much more radical in their approach to faith. And we, as the older folks, we need to support that and encourage it. Otherwise, guess what? We've got no church in 20 years because no one's coming after them. All right. Very briefly at the end, I'd like to touch on three elements. Now, positively speaking, that's maybe a negative message. I don't mean to be negative. I wish I had a Frisbee where I could throw it to you, but I don't. More positively, what are some of the trends that we have been able to find, and this American study as well has been able to find, to show the features that are making it possible for young men in particular to take the courageous call to be priests, to be radical, to give their lives totally to Jesus Christ in this way. Okay, 3 trends very briefly, and then I'll sit down. First, on people. We asked in our survey, who are the people that were influential to you? Now, I don't know what you can see. You probably can't see too much. But if you have a book, you can flip around and find a picture that looks like that on page 13, if you're interested. Okay? The takeaway here, 2 takeaways I'll point out. First of all, family is absolutely foundational. First point. Oldest children are more likely to become priests than any other type of children. Interesting, hey? Their guilt is just bred into them. We have this child who's a seminarian. But I don't think we guilted him into it. Anyways, so first, oldest children. Secondly, if you come from a big family defined as having 4 or more children, you're many, many, many more times likely to produce a vocation. Interesting. Second point I want to make about people is that while family is foundational, you need more than the family. Here, look at this one. When they were asked, if you can see it, how important was your encouragement, example, or friendship to you as you considered whether to enter the seminary from these types of people? Well, parents are very important, yes, but guess what? The parish priest was more important. Most of these guys that we studied were in their 20s, about 24 years old. So this is a 24-year-old young man. He's out of the house, he's doing other things. So the parents' influence obviously decreases, as it should. Who then takes the front and center line? It's the parish priest. It's not the bishop, it's not the vocation director. It's you. All right, on people. Let's go to the parish next. What did we find about parishes? And I'm just about done. Useful data we looked at here corresponds and correlates highly to what the US found in their large sample of 9,000. The takeaway here is this. The number one activity that young men were involved with in their parish prior to going to seminary, that is correlated with them being entering the path of priesthood, was being a what? An altar server. Is that a surprise? Our souls are mimetic, aren't they? That is to say, they're imitative. Look, if I want to be a fireman, but I never met a fireman, I'm never going to be a fireman. Pope Francis talks about smelling the sheep or something. Or having the smell. Like the sheep. Okay. This is what he's talking about. This is what he's talking about. You've got to have young men who are in your cadre. You've got to encourage them. Why? Because the soul is imitative, and young men need priests to look up to. Last point. Okay, how about their prayer practices? Briefly, interesting. So we asked, what are the kinds of prayer practices that you engaged in? And the number one was Eucharistic adoration. The second was praying of the Rosary. So thank you to all our priests who make Eucharistic adoration available and possible for all of us. Let me conclude. In sum, where do priests come from? They come from us, from the people of God. We need to cultivate a vibrant Catholic culture where families are open to life, where teachers instruct without apology, and where each one of us and our churches become centers of evangelization. In other words, where we have all hands on deck. Thanks very much.